This is Chair Arnold. I would like to call the special study session of the Planning Commission to order at 5:01 p.m. Planning Secretary, may we have a roll call vote? Roll call, please. Thank you.
Most definitely. Commissioner Carbajal?
Here.
Commissioner Hernandez? Not present. Commissioner Jimenez? Commissioner Rounds?
Here.
Chair Arnold?
Here.
We have a quorum, 3.
Okay, we'll move to item number 3. Mr. Morrell, would you like to make your statement?
Mr. Chairperson, Kwong is making the opening remarks.
Okay. All right, so I'd like to note that we have an hour for tonight's study session, followed by a regularly scheduled Planning Commission at 6 o'clock. So I'd like to call on Assistant Director of Planning, Quan Nguyen, to present item number 3.
Thank you, Chair Arnold. Good evening, Commissioners. Just want to start off by wishing you all a very happy new year. We have some exciting projects this coming year. You may recall from past communications that staff originally intended to bring the general plan update to you tonight for your consideration and recommendation to the City Council. However, based on recent feedback that staff has received, we felt it was a good idea to have a study session to provide you with a more in-depth understanding of several changes that are being presented within the 2040 general plan, and more importantly, why such changes are being recommended. So it is our hope that the study session will provide you with the necessary background that you will need in preparation for when we bring the general plan to you on January 24th for your consideration. Without further ado, I would like to introduce our general plan consultant, Jose Rodriguez, who will be providing you with the presentation tonight. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Quan. Good evening, Chairperson Ken Arnold and members of the Planning Commission. As Quan said, my name is Jose Rodriguez. I'm a consultant with MIG, and we're assisting the city in preparing the general plan. Quan, do you want to go ahead and share your screen, unless you have it shared already, the PowerPoint presentation? Or I can share it. I currently don't have sharing opportunities at the moment. Okay, thank you.
Does it work?
All right, give me a moment. Share my screen. There we go. Great, thanks. Let's get started. Let's jump right into the presentation. I have a lot of slides, but I'm going to go through some of them fairly quickly. Some of the materials have been presented to the Planning Commission previously, I believe back in November. My colleague Laura Stetson, who's principal with MIG, is also on this Zoom call. But since we have an hour, I'd like to go through it quickly, and then we'll go to question and comment period. Just real brief, the agenda includes the general plan process. I want to briefly talk about the housing element, changes that we made to the land use plan, and some of the background information on why we made some of these changes, and then talk about the next steps in terms of what are the next meetings that are coming up and any other opportunities for the public to comment on the general plan. All right, the process. Just real briefly, what a general plan is. The general plan is a long-range vision document. It's meant to represent the community. We've done a lot of community engagement over the past, I'd say approximately a year and a half. But the general plan is meant to be a long-term document, visionary. It's supposed to represent the vision over the next 15 to 20 years, what Santa Fe Springs, how it will transition to that future. A living document, it can be adjusted over time, typically about 4 times a year, and the document's meant to be comprehensive. meaning there's specific elements and a defined area that we're supposed to describe. In terms of the engagement, we diversified our engagement, did all types of engagement outreach, from doing a website, newspaper publications, flyers. We've done interviews. We've done 4 community workshops, a paper survey, and we met with many commissions, both planning, traffic, and we've done study sessions with the city council. The 4 workshops and other meetings we've done started in September of 2020. They've gone through 2021 with a recent community workshop in November 14th. We're actually came together at City Hall to review the draft general plan. We did have a workshop to solicit EIR comments at the beginning of December. We've done a lot of study sessions and they're still going on. Obviously, we have a study session tonight, but we've met with the Planning Commission and City Council to talk about land use alternatives. We've gave everyone an update on the draft general plan. And like I said, we had a study session with the Planning Commission actually in October of late last year. We are having a special study session with the City Council tomorrow morning at 9 a.m. And we recognize there are some concerns from the business community, particularly industrial businesses and property owners, about some of the land use changes. So we'll talk about that in a moment. The draft general plan consists of all the existing elements in the current general plan, but there are 2 new elements: environmental justice and economic development. Those are 2 new elements. Our vision and the guiding principles that kind of helped put the general plan, at least the policies in place. We talked about creating healthy and safe neighborhoods, economic strength with local businesses, a diversified economy, creating a new downtown, and really pushing active and diverse transportation based off the recent active transportation plan that was adopted late last year, or a little over a year ago, I apologize. Environmental justice was a key priority, clean and sustainable environment, equity, a resilient community reflecting climate change, and really pushing technology for both city services and incorporating it throughout the community. The housing element was a key driver for the general plan, specifically because housing elements are due every 8 years, and this housing element is due fairly soon. The state has given the SCAG, the Southern California Association of Governments, responsibility of identifying how many housing units should be built in Santa Fe Springs over the next 8 years. They have identified 952 housing units to be built over the next 8 years. Just to let you know, the city's not responsible for constructing or building those housing units. The city, through the housing element, is required to provide the zoning and land use policies to allow for those units to be built in the community by property owners throughout Santa Fe Springs. The 952 housing units are divided into various income levels. These are based off affordability, and typically when we put those in the housing element, it typically aligns with density of different development. So the lower and very low income housing is typically meant to be accommodated by higher density housing. The more above moderate is lower density housing, because those housing costs more. So therefore, households that can afford those, we attribute those to the lower density housing. So single family housing, duplexes, and so forth. The very low and low will primarily be multifamily and mixed use development. So this is how we, through our land use plan, identified locations for the different housing. We identified where accessory dwelling units can be built, obviously in the single family neighborhoods. We identified where some townhomes, kind of the more moderate middle density. Mixed use is where we identified new housing in the land use plan, primarily adjacent to transit stations, both proposed and existing, and then as well as a new downtown. And so those areas next to the transit stations are what we're calling transit-oriented communities. We're looking at creating areas where housing and development creates mixed-use communities where people can easily walk and get to transit stations or to the transit stations and get to either the light rail or the heavy rail through Metrolink. Let's talk about the draft land use plan. And if you recall, some of you do recall the draft land use plan that has been presented to the Planning Commission multiple times. And this is a plan that's been affirmed or at least reviewed by both the City Council and I know the Planning Commission looked at some alternatives, I think in late 2020. What I'm showing on the screen is actually the existing general plan. So you can see these are the existing land use designations that are currently adopted. Let me show you our draft land use plan. We've updated it with some new land use designations. We also did fill in what's called the sphere of influence. By state law, we are required to plan for the sphere areas, although they're not in the city of Santa Fe Springs. Several new designations include a high density residential, and this primarily falls within the sphere of influence areas and within some existing higher density apartments. We wanted to align some of the residential densities with those units. Many mixed use categories were added. We've added a new downtown. We've added mixed use at 40 dwelling units per acre and a new mixed use TOD. And again, those align with those transit stations as identified earlier. I'm going to talk a little bit in some upcoming slides about the light industrial and industrial designations. And we did make some changes there, and I'll explain some of the those changes momentarily. I also want to bring up the freeway commercial designation, which primarily falls along the I-5 freeway. And I have some other slides to provide some details, but we wanted to identify what the vision was for the uses along the I-5 freeway as well. So I'll talk about those in the upcoming slides. This shows a detail of the northern part of the city. You can see at the the northern part of the city on Washington and Norwalk, where the mixed use designation has been applied at the higher density, where the planned station for a light rail is being planned. We did make some changes to the light industrial. We've expanded the light industrial, and I'll explain why we expanded the light industrial. And primarily, one of the visions in this general plan is protecting some of the health and safety of residential neighborhoods. And so we want to make sure there wasn't heavy industrial uses adjoining or at least close by to some of the residential areas. And then these are some of the land use changes we've made to the southern part of the city. Again, as I mentioned, the light industrial expansion and some land use changes to the I-5 freeway. I'm going to briefly talk about the text of the industrial land uses and the freeway commercial. This text here, I know there's a lot of text here, but this is what's in the current general plan that reflects the freeway commercial designation, or at least what's in the current general plan. The current general plan talks about having a freeway corridor. It talks about having stores and offices and businesses with high freeway visibility. It talks about having auto dealerships and restaurants and hotels and motels and so forth. And it really sets up those land uses because it's, there's exposure to the freeway. What the general plan didn't do was actually have a designation on the map. So that's one thing we did in the new draft general plan. This is our updated text that we did for the freeway commercial. We talked about this corridor being a regional serving corridor, importance of generating local tax revenue through the hotels, talking about, again, the vehicle dealerships, but entertainment uses that really correspond with the freeway visibility and more of a regional and community serving area in terms of land uses. But again, the importance of revenues for the city in terms of sales tax and revenues that the city has identified this corridor as being really important to the city, as well as the previous general plan, or should I say the current general plan. Industrial land use. This is the light industrial. What's currently in the current general plan. It specifically talks about making sure that in light industrial, that the sort of the heavy trucking and more large scale manufacturing is excluded. Talks about small and medium warehousing may be permitted, providing based on truck traffic, making sure that it's not too extensive. But I think the key thing is talking about the safeguards to protecting nearby residential, commercial, and public uses. The new general plan really expands upon that. I'm going to highlight the key changes in the green here about industrial uses, really that generate high volumes of hazardous materials that are explicitly prohibited within this zone, trucking and warehousing, and other large-scale logistic uses that are really close proximity to residential uses are prohibited. And then just businesses overall that don't have an impact to the nearby residential areas. That's really the intent of the light industrial designation. It allows commerce, it still allows businesses. A lot of existing industrial uses are still allowed in the light industrial designation. But what the general plan is trying to do is really restrict some more obnoxious and intensive uses that could affect really nearby residential uses. And I'll show some maps in a moment here. Another designation change that we've made is to the heavy industrial. This is the text for the heavy industrial designation in the current general plan. It talks about having major distribution facilities within this land use. It does talk about a number of employees working in warehousings. It tends to be a little bit lower due to mechanization. Truck activities occur most frequently during off-peak periods and adjacent to the street system. The changes that we made to the text to the heavy industrial, again, really again, is to emphasize this does allow for the broadest range of industrial uses, manufacturing, outdoor storage, logistic activities, a lot of those that do take place in large buildings. But I think the key thing is, again, the protection of the residential areas. We want to restrict those that are, within close proximity to residential neighborhoods. So we reflected the text to support that. And then we do allow some supporting complementary uses as well. This is the change to the general plan in terms of light industrial and industrial. The dark purple areas is still the industrial designation that allows the broadest industrial uses in the city. Now we have expanded in some areas, not all of it. The zoning did accommodate some light industrial, but we did expand the light industrial even more, particularly properties that are within 500 feet of residential neighborhoods. This is the southern part of the city. But this map shows not only the residential neighborhoods in Santa Fe Springs, but even the surrounding communities of Norwalk and La Mirada. So we measured where some of the heavy industrials was adjacent to residential areas. And some of those areas we did convert to light industrial uses. And again, the purpose is to protect some of the residential uses from the impacts associated with those industrial uses. We did take some cue off some of the handbook from the California Air Resources Board that has recommendations in terms of citing industrial uses away from residential uses, 500 feet for near freeways and high traffic roads, 1,000 feet from distribution centers. But we just use the 500 feet kind of as our baseline, measuring between industrial and residential in the general plan. Another framework for the land use changes that we've made is based off the environmental justice element. This is a new element for the general plan, but it is required for Santa Fe Springs. The reason why this element is required is because the majority, I'd say almost 80% of the community in Santa Fe Springs is a disadvantaged community. And that is defined by areas that have high pollution burdens and some of the social characteristics that, that are probably the worst within the top 10 to 5% within the state of California. Some of the pollution burdens can range from air emissions, vehicle traffic, some hazardous materials, and pollution burdens from various issues related to contamination and some of the existing businesses. This map shows the adjacency of the residential areas to, again, some of the pollution burdens that are identified through the state, what's called the Cal EnviroScreen map. This is all in the environmental justice element. It also shows some of the planned land uses, the cleanup sites, proximity to freeways. And I know there's some water contamination associated with businesses in the adjoining city that's kind of contaminated the local groundwater. All of these has contributed to high factors of being a pollution burden community for the residential areas. We try to address some of these issues in the general plan. We identified where residential uses are within so many feet of various pollution burdens and industrial uses. We're looking to potentially create what's called green buffer zones to separate some of those uses between residential neighborhoods. Green buffer zones is one approach. As I mentioned, we've expanded the light industrial designation. Enforcement and monitoring our policies, we've included cleanup prioritization, community education as well, in terms of what are the challenges, both from the community side in terms of the social, economic challenges and the pollution burdens. Let's move on to the I-5 freeway commercial corridor. These are some of the existing land uses that currently make up that corridor. There's some commercial uses there now. There's some light industrial uses. I know there's several older kind of hotel, motel type uses, an aggregate facility where the trucks load aggregate for cement trucks and so forth. If I were to list out the existing land uses, they include auto repair, building material sales. There are some corporate offices that are in there, manufacturing, as I mentioned, some hotels. There is definitely recreational vehicle sales, vehicle rentals, and there are several warehouses there now, truck services. So for the general plan, we wanted to establish what is the vision for this corridor. What do we want? How do we want this corridor to transition over the next 15 to 20 years? We recognize there's a lot of industrial uses that are there today. The vision we have established, basing it off the current general plan, is establishing this as a regional freeway corridor and take advantage of the traffic volume from the I-5 freeway. As I mentioned, the current general plan does identify this as a freeway corridor, just not on the map. The zoning map does also have a freeway overlay that applies to the area. We did a little bit of digging in terms of how much sales tax this particular corridor, the area that we've identified, how much sales tax annually this corridor had generated for the last fiscal year. And we showed about just under $2 million in annual sales tax that's generated. Again, as I mentioned, the vision that we're looking for in this general plan is how do we take advantage of these properties, and again, the visibility from the freeway. We do recognize there are within this area some of the distribution centers that don't unfortunately contribute to some of the sales tax through business to business sales. And so I know some do and some don't. We do want to recognize that. In terms of mixed use, we've identified several areas in the land use plan that shows where we've put in mixed use. And these mixed use areas do provide additional opportunities to meet that 952 housing units that was identified in the arena and in the housing element. And so that's a key component of where we're, being able to accommodate that 952 housing units, particularly along the Washington Boulevard corridor and at Imperial and Bloomfield. And then the benefit of those is that there are planned and existing transit stations within those areas that take advantage of reducing greenhouse emissions. Having people be able to walk from their housing unit to a transit station is definitely a plus. We've identified a downtown area for Santa Fe Springs, and we allow opportunity for various uses within the downtown, from commercial to hotels, but also for some residential uses as well. So it's meant to be flexible in terms of various uses to create a downtown where people can come and gather and create gathering spaces. The mixed use that allows up to 40 dwelling units per acre in the general plan does allow heights between 2 to 4 stories for buildings for both mixed use or standalone residential and commercial. Our mixed use downtown also allows 40 dwelling units per acre, anywhere from 2 to 6 stories in height. And then I guess this would be our most extreme designation in terms of height. It allows 20 to 60 dwelling units per acre, and again, 3 to 6 stories in height. And these are areas, again, that are really adjacent to the transit stations, so that residents can take advantage of walking to light rail and heavy rail trains. I want to briefly just talk about some of the housing changes that we made that are based off new state laws. One of them in particularly is the faith-based organizations or churches or religious institutions. The first one is SB 899, and this particular law does allow affordable housing to be constructed on properties owned by churches and faith-based institutions. And if they provide affordable housing, specifically if they have covenants to protect long-term affordable housing, either through the next 45 or 55 years, they can actually bypass zoning restrictions through local governments. So it gives those churches a little bit of flexibility in building affordable housing on their properties. Another one is AB 1851, and similarly, this allows churches and other institutions to build on their larger parking lots that they use for services. And so within 50% of their parking lots, they could build housing, and that within those half of that parking lot, they don't have to rebuild or provide additional parking to meet the needs of the church. So it gives them, again, flexibility in building housing on parking lots or vacant lands that are owned by the churches. We have made some land use changes reflecting some of the churches along Florence Avenue that does allow for some residential uses, but doesn't mean those churches are allowed to go away. They can remain, and the city is not pushing them out. They can redevelop some of their parking lots, but they're not being forced to redevelop. In terms of next steps, we had today is the Planning Commission study session. We are looking to have a Planning Commission adoption hearing in January 24th, so a couple of weeks from now. We're looking for City Council adoption hearing on February 8th. We'll put, based on any final comments, we'll put together the final general plan, submit the housing element back up to the state after it's been adopted for their final review and certification so that we have a certified housing element. We are pushing off, we talked about doing zoning code along with the general plan, particularly for the housing and the mixed use development. We're going to push that off a little bit into the winter of spring to allow more community input on the zoning changes that we make. And so we're looking to bring that back to both Planning Commission and City Council for study sessions, and probably have a community town hall meeting, but then looking at adoption probably more in the summer to review. Again, this is a targeted zoning amendment, again, specifically reflecting the housing changes. And those have to be done by October based off some housing element state law. And as I mentioned, it's not on here, but we do have another study session with some of the industrial groups and the city council tomorrow, and the public is invited to that meeting. The immediate housing penalties, we are under a compressed timeline, particularly for the housing element. If we go beyond February 22, there are some challenges the city has to face if the housing element is not adopted. Couple things. One is if we go way beyond February, there is potentially loss of some grants that are associated with the housing element. And keep in mind, the housing element and the land use element are tied closely together. So we're recommending a housing element and land use plan adoption, the whole entire general plan at the upcoming public hearings. If we don't get the housing element adopted by the end of February, there are also some legal liabilities. It does put the city in a legal liability, or opens it up to potential lawsuits by other entities, or potentially by the state of California. The zoning code amendment, we decided to give it a little bit more time. We do have some more time to amend that, but we do have to adopt it by October 15th. And there are some grants that are associated if we don't adopt that by a certain date. I'm going to briefly just touch upon these other penalties. If the city is not meeting their housing element requirements, they're not proactively meeting the RHNA requirements, or those 952 housing units, as I mentioned, opens it up to legal suits. The city could lose their permitting authority. There are some financial penalties. I know some cities have incurred some of those penalties. The court can decide to step in and kind of help identify why the city is not meeting their housing obligations. And eventually the state could take over, or the courts, and determine that all housing development has to go through a ministerial or over-the-counter process to make sure that the city is meeting their housing obligations as identified in the housing element. I know I briefly went through that presentation and kind of went through it fairly quickly. I do want to state that staff and the consultants are here to answer any questions. And looks like we have about 30 minutes to answer questions and comments. So we are here to do those. So thank you.
Oh, thank you very much. I appreciate your input. I'd like to open up the public comments section. Anyone joining us through Zoom can use the raised hand function. If you wish to make a public comment on any item on the agenda or not on the agenda, the planning secretary will see if you have your hand raised through the Zoom application. Please note that you'll have 3 minutes to speak. Planning secretary, do we have any members that wish to speak today?
Chair Arnold, we do. However, I'd like to do another roll call since we did have planning commissioners joining us.
Okay.
If you don't mind, let me take that first.
Sure.
Commissioner Carbajal.
Here.
Commissioner Hernandez.
Here.
Commissioner Rounds.
Here.
Vice Chair Jimenez.
Here.
Chair Arnold.
Here.
We do have a full quorum. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
And I do see quite a number of raised hands. I will go in the order as they present themselves, just to let everybody know in the audience and attendance.
Teresa.
Yes, sir.
Before you do, normally there's a period when the Planning Commission have any questions. Are we skipping that?
No, and I was going to make note of that prior. It was indicated on the script. However, Chair Arnold, I was going to make sure that Planning Commissioners had their opportunity as well and address that factor. Chair Arnold, I'll pass the screen back to you. And if you want to ask that of our commissioners, please.
Okay. Yeah, I'm sorry I skipped that. Do any of the commissioners have any questions on this item?
Commissioner Carbajal, I need a clarification, please.
Okay.
For the housing element, what was the deadline on that, please, sir?
February 12th is the 120-day grace period. Well, let me back up. Housing elements in the SCAG region are due on October 15, 2021, but the state does allow a 120-day grace period, what puts us down to about February 12th to get the housing element adopted. So that's the due date.
Thank you. And that was it. I already got on the multi-use purposes. Thank you for the answer of the question, sir.
Anybody else have a question, commissioners?
Vice Chair Jimenez, no questions.
Okay.
Chair Hernandez, no questions.
Okay, Mr. Rounds?
Can we defer for any questions or comments until after we hear the public?
Is that something we can do, Mr. Morrell? Can we also ask questions after the comment section?
I would defer to our city attorney on that.
Yes, you can definitely make any comments or questions after you've heard the public comment.
Yeah, okay, because there might be something that one of the public comments people have that will raise a question amongst the commissioners. So I guess at this time, we'll go ahead and have the planning secretary start with the public comments.
The first hand raised is Moshe Sassover.
Hello.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
So I just want to address a couple of things. It seems as though the consultants are putting up a lot of challenges in front of the city, the planning commission, because there's a February 12th deadline. That's a fairly short period of time. The housing element maybe has a deadline, but the rest of the general plan really needs to be better considered. The first time that we saw changes to the commercial and industrial land uses was in November of 2021. And the process really has not allowed us to have a clear dialogue and understanding of what the city and the city consultants are seeking to do. Not only do we have concerns about the impact on our properties, we also have a concern about the process. There's a lot of talk about environmental justice. There's a lot of talk about economic development. One of the documents, one of the main documents, talks about the impact on the neighborhood and the terrible environmental situation because of industrial development. However, when you look at the document assumes that Golden West Refinery is still operating, which it hasn't been the case for 30 years. And I wonder, has anybody taken into account the fact that the city and we and others have worked collaboratively to redevelop the largest piece of property inside the city, and we've created thousands of jobs. We have solar that actually improves gas house emissions. It captures them. We have renewable energy, and not all industrial is bad. And what I would suggest is we need to bifurcate the process. If the city needs to do the housing element, it should do the housing element, but we need to have more time to have a collaborative dialogue and conversation about the impact of these commercial and industrial redesignations and allow the business community to participate in a meaningful way, not just the window dressing of having some meetings where we haven't had substantive discussions. And so this feels very different from the historical relationship that we have always had with the city, where we have worked collaboratively. And so again, I would urge you to bifurcate this process between the housing element and the commercial and industrial uses. And I appreciate you listening to me. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Teresa, would you call for the next person, please?
Definitely. Next is, I have two names, Irma and Alejandro Cutran.
Hi, good evening. There's actually two of us that would like to speak, and I can go first.
Okay, go ahead.
Good evening. My name's Irma Huitron. I'm a resident of Santa Fe Springs. Thank you for this meeting regarding the general plan. As a previous speaker spoke, we also believe that the public review process for the general plan and the documents and the many, many changes that the city is proposing as part of this document has not been fully transparent to the public. We've made some of those comments at previous planning commission and city council meetings related to the lack of information on the city website, broken links, very limited information, the city and residents having to contact staff members for specific information and submitting public records requests, which I'm still waiting on additional documents. It's a fact-finding hunt, if you will, of us residents practically trying to beg and submit records requests to get information on how things are done within the city. And that has translated into, again, lack of transparency and how decisions are being made related to general plan designations. Specifically related to the project site at 11733 Florence Avenue, we are requesting that that parcel be removed from the land use designation being proposed as multifamily. And we are respectfully requesting that that be designated as low density residential. As you may have heard in the general plan documents, large parcels are hard to find in the city of Santa Fe Springs. We have a lot of infill projects. This is almost a 3-acre site, and it is being proposed for medium density residential. It is very conveniently located next to a very large athletic field, existing single family residential neighborhood. And it is a prime real estate that can be used to further that type of housing. As the housing element in the general plan says, there has to be a variety of housing, and it's been decades and decades since the city has seen a more traditional single family neighborhood where there can be public streets, parkways, shaded, where you can walk your dog, you can meet your neighbors. You don't feel like you're trespassing on private property like other gated developments. We respectfully request that that be redesignated to low density residential to allow that type of public amenity, a neighborhood be built in the city of Santa Fe Springs. These parcels are hard to find. We have one here in the city. Let's not miss that opportunity. Let's redesignate that site to low density residential. And that's what we're requesting today of Planning Commission, and we'll do the same tomorrow at City Council. Thank you for your time.
Thank you for your comments. And we would like to go ahead and have your husband speak next. Go ahead, sir.
Hi, good evening, and thank you for the opportunity to address you. My comments are basically regarding the engagement of the community in this process. In particular, we attended the meeting at Town Center Hall just before the holidays, where there was a presentation with banners and pictures, and the public was invited to attend to make comments. My wife and I attended, as well as a couple of other residents. We made several comments on Post-it notes that we were told to post on the different boards that were up on easels. But yet we don't see any of the results of our comments. The presentation that we saw today from the consultant, what we saw in the last meeting to City Council, those items don't seem to be addressed. And we're just wondering at what point will our comments be addressed? In particular, a couple of the comments are regarding the changing of the zones for the churches. I understand the AB 1851 and SB 899, but the city does not necessarily have to change the zoning for those properties. We feel that by the city doing that, they are essentially rolling out a red carpet for developers who will now basically prey on these properties And if one of these churches is having trouble financially, perhaps, maybe during COVID or what have you, the land is much more valuable now to a developer because the city has automatically already changed the zoning to allow for medium density residential, where you don't have to do that. So the church can at any time, if they decide to do that, they can come to the city and change it and make the request, and it will be, it will be followed. But I don't see why we're going across the entire city, Santa Fe Springs, and changing every city property, even Foursquare Church, even the Catholic Church St. Pius, that we're changing it to a different zone. Another comment we had was regarding the general plan. As it stands right now, there's absolutely no allocation for single family residential homes. That's troubling for us as residents in Santa Fe Springs, considering the heritage in Santa Fe Springs and known as a single family home environment. We would like for the commission, our consultant, to address that and see if there's a way to still allow for single family residents in Santa Fe Springs and not be a dinosaur that has gone away forever. Thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you for your comments. Madam Secretary, would you call the next person, please?
Yes, Chair Arnold. The next speaker is Jeff Hamilton.
Okay, go ahead, sir.
Yes, hi, can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Fantastic. Thanks, Teresa, and good evening, commissioners. My name is Jeff Hamilton, and I am with Goodman. It's been a little while since we've addressed the commission, so just as a reminder, Goodman was introduced into the city of Santa Fe Springs when we purchased the former Powerine oil refinery, and we worked with the city and the commission there to redevelop that site. And also during our redevelopment of that site, we also purchased the former Vaughn's distribution center, which we have upgraded and now referred to as the Goodman Gateway of Santa Fe Springs. And we're talking to you tonight largely on that property. And also we wanted to address a little bit of the general plan process that other people have touched on, which is, this process has been going on for roughly 20 months or so, which is almost identically the same time that COVID has been around. So due to COVID and a variety of other reasons, we feel that the general business population, as well as Goodman, was not really notified and kept in the loop on, more specifically, this former Vaughn's site that is being rezoned for approximately 60% of our site is being downgraded to what they're proposing now is what they're calling a business park. And basically one of the reasons they're justifying it, as you heard Jose mention, is due to social justice. And while obviously we are very keen on that, the property has operated as a distribution center for roughly 50 plus years. It is located right next to freeways. And then on top of that, some of the response from the local residences in Norwalk, they're complaining that there's additional trucks and things of that nature. Well, we've done a variety of noise studies and traffic studies and proven that that we are in fact not making any noise beyond the ambient noise from the freeway. And we can certainly share with you those reports in the next coming days here. And largely, we're here tonight just to sort of say that we think this process is going a little bit too fast. And we'd like to, as Moshe had mentioned, maybe bifurcating the housing element because we understand the need for you guys to develop that housing component. So we're just asking to revisit this process and slow it down. And ultimately, there's really just no need to change the zoning, in particular for our Vaughn site. So appreciate the time, and I'm sure we'll be chatting again soon. Thank you.
Thank you. Teresa, could you introduce the next person, please?
Yes. Ajit Tind.
Are you there, sir?
Yes. Can you hear me, Chair?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Thank you. Good evening, Chair Arnold and members of the Planning Commission. My name is Ajit Thind. I'm an attorney at the law firm of Bertan and Tucker. I represent Premier RV Storage SFS LLC, which owns a property in the northwest corner of the city behind the Dollar Self Storage on Pioneer. I sent correspondence to you earlier today to object to the proposed downzoning of the property to light industrial, which is what is being contemplated currently. I want to thank all of you for your consideration of our request and objection, as I know you are hearing from a number of residents and property owners with their comments. I wanted to emphasize to you that this downzone of my client's property is both unexpected and misplaced. First, my client has been working with city staff over the last several years to bring forward an industrial user that can best utilize the site. There have been numerous meetings with staff to hammer out what type of use would best fit the city's needs for this unique site. However, it came as a shock and surprise to my client when it heard in November that the site was to be downzoned pursuant to the general plan update. We understand from staff and Mr. Rodriguez's presentation that the impetus for this downzone is due to the property's proximity to residential uses. However, my client's property is unique in that it is extensively buffered and tucked away from all sensitive uses. To the west and south, the property is bordered by the San Gabriel River and accompanying trail. Also to the south and along much of the perimeter of the property are railroad tracks, which are no longer in use. To the north is the Dollar Self Storage, and to the east is the 605 freeway. In addition, the property is actually at a lower elevation than those that surround it and is not easily visible. No residential uses are directly adjacent, and any that are nearby are sufficiently far away that they won't be affected by an industrial use, especially given the stringent site development standards and other tools at the city's disposal in the municipal code that will be triggered when the ultimate land use application is brought forward. We want to repeat our strenuous objection to the downzone of the property to light industrial. We hope that the city understands that we have a goal of bringing forward an end user that will best fit the site and mitigate any potential harm to any surrounding uses, create jobs, and will contribute to the city's tax base. Unfortunately, a downzone of the property will simply not make any of that possible. And I also want to emphasize that the city has the option of moving forward with the housing element first to meet its deadline from HCD. The rest of the general plan and the land use element seem rushed and should be the subject of further debate and deliberation, as it's clear that many stakeholders feel they need more time to understand its implications. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Teresa, would you call the next person, please?
Definitely, Chair Arnold. We have Stephanie Wandel.
Hey, ma'am, can you hear me?
Yes, hello. Yes, good evening. This is Stefan Wandel. Can you hear me?
Yes, go ahead, sir.
Good, very good. Thanks for taking comments. So I'm a member of the business community. About 18 months ago, I was asked to join the General Plan Advisory Group, which is being referred to as a GPAG. And one of the things that the GPAG was asked to do was to advise the Planning Commission. So I guess in that capacity, I'd like to speak this evening. As somebody who's done real estate development, large-scale redevelopment in many cities around Southern California, who's done real estate development in 20 countries and 12 states around the US, I thought it was a great opportunity to participate in the GPAG, and I was really pleased, and I think I've done my part in advising the city over the last 18 months on all aspects of the city. It was informative. There was a lot of great discussions associated with residential, a lot of back and forth on pros and cons and discussion around the residential land uses. I thought that was very informative. However, unfortunately, the back end of the process was rushed. When it became time to talk about the commercial element, that was largely overlooked in the GPAG. you've heard from quite a few folks on the line today saying that the outreach was incomplete, the information wasn't shared widely. The community events were not necessarily well attended. The comments made at those events were not addressed. And I think specifically, I'd like to discuss the commercial element, which in my book was completely overlooked. The land use changes on the commercial element was never introduced to the GPAG in any form. The discussion by staff and consultant tonight, specifically on the I-5 corridor, that they're just formalizing historical discussion, is incorrect. We have had the opportunity to have attorneys look at this who've confirmed that's not a complete assessment of the historical and the current zoning codes. And probably last but not least, while the residential side was done reasonably well, the commercial side really, I don't think, has fully grasped the impacts on the neighbors, on business, job displacements, impact on neighboring parcels. Again, we're hearing now, and I think it's a great time to have a conversation, and we approve that. But I would like to agree with the individuals, many of which have wanted to bifurcate the commercial element from the housing element. I think commercial element needs more study. Thank you.
Well, thank you for your comments, sir. And thank you for your participation in the GPAG. It was very good. Teresa, would you call the next person, please?
Definitely. We have Steve Messer with Rexford Industrial on the line.
Okay. Go ahead, sir.
Good evening, commissioners. I'm Steve Messer, Director of Entitlements for Rexford Industrial. I just want to let you know, we submitted a formal letter in writing to the city today, addressed to the City Council on this issue of the general plan update and our opposition to it. So I just want to echo a lot of the commenters' concerns on it being rushed as well. We agree with that, that things have not been fully vetted or presented to the business community, and it sounds like some of the residential community as well. But the letter, just real quickly, talks about, we have over 15 properties in the city that about a third of our portfolio in the city would be affected by the zoning changes or the general plan changes, quote, down zoning. So it could have significant financial impact that we would like addressed further. And the letter goes into more detail, but I just want to give you some of the bullet points. And then regarding the pollution burdens, we do feel that some of the data presented does not really address the localized impacts from industrial development. It appears to be more regional oriented, the data, and as well as some more site specific, such as oil wells and water contamination, that's not really, that are existing situations that should not be a blanket downzoning to address those kinds of things that can be done on a site-by-site basis or a regional basis. As projects come to you for approval, that'd be the best way to address those. And then regarding the freeway commercial, we agree with everyone's comments on that as well, and issues, concerns that the dual zoning, basically the dual zoning that's been allowed there since the general plan in 1993, where it allows both commercial and industrial, seems to be working. And so we would suggest keeping that dual zoning to allow continued use of industrial uses in the freeway commercial area. That seems to make a lot of sense. And again, there's details about that in the letter about, market study should be done, for example, to show that commercial may not be that viable along the freeway, and commercial makes more sense in more pedestrian oriented mixed use areas, which might make more sense in the city's mixed use areas. And then lastly, the city has talked about needing revenues from new commercial development, and the city's looking at a business license tax increase, which the industrial community is on board with and understands that we may, be bearing some of that cost. So we're okay with that in general, and that should help offset some of the issues of some of these zoning changes. If you could relook at that, appreciate your time.
And Chair Arnold, the last speaker with his raised hand is Jesse Flores.
Hi, can you hear me? Hello? Oh, okay. I'm guessing you can hear me. Hi, I'm Jesse, and I'm a resident of the neighboring city of Norwalk, but have friends and family in and around Santa Fe Springs. I'm here to highlight the importance of considering development impacts on surrounding cities like Norwalk. In particular, I have friends and family who live around the former Vaughn site, and we greatly support the down zoning of the site to a less intense use classification of business park that considers the health and safety of families who live in the surrounding neighborhood. The existing facility relies on polluting diesel trucks to pick up and drop off goods, releasing harmful nitrogen oxides and particulate matter to surrounding residences. In turn, this air pollution can lead to health impacts such as asthma, chronic obstructive pulmonary diseases, cancer, and premature death. Our friends and family have learned recently, since leasing of the Vaughn's property in 2018, that heavy truck traffic from this business has increased significantly, from 50 per day when it operated as a Vaughn's distribution center to an estimated 350 trucks per day today. Truck trips impact residents living along the routes from the freeway to the property, including Norwalk Boulevard, Bloomfield Avenue, and Shoemaker Avenue. We encourage the city of Santa Fe Springs to work with the city of Norwalk to consider the impact of the site. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Okay, that was the last person that had their hand raised, Teresa?
Yes, Commissioner Arnold, with that speaker, we're just at 6:03. So unless the commissioners have questions, we're at 6:03 right now.
Yeah. So should we go ahead and adjourn this meeting, or should we ask for the any of the commissioners have any questions at this time, and continue on?
Chair Arnold, this is Kathy.
Yes.
You know what we could do is, if you guys have any questions, we can maybe do it for a few minutes if anyone has any comments or questions, and possibly have the consultant respond if it's necessary. But let's just cap it maybe no more than a few minutes, just because we have the regularly scheduled meeting. We don't want people to be waiting too long. So
is there an ability that we could continue this meeting to a later date if there's more comments? Or should we just go ahead and ask the commissioners if they have questions?
I think probably you should ask the commissioner if they have any questions. If we need to have another similar meeting to this for the city council, we can certainly do that for the business community. But I would suggest that we ask the planning commission if they have any questions.
Okay. Does any of the planning commissioners have questions?
Ken, this is Bill. I'll start it off. A lot of my questions and concerns were already brought up tonight, and I appreciate everyone that spoke, all 8 of you that spoke. A lot of good questions, a lot of good comments, and I just want to reflect too that this city was built and has been built on the business community. Without them, we wouldn't be the city we are today. So no other questions or comments, sir.
Thank you. Ms. Carbajal, do you have any questions?
No questions at this time. Thank you.
Johnny, do you have any questions?
Chair Arnold, none at this moment.
Thank you, sir. And Gabriel, do you have any questions?
No questions, sir.
Okay, I don't have any questions either. So let's adjourn this meeting at 6:05 p.m.
I do apologize before we adjourn. I do need to make for the record that we did receive 4 letters of comment that I have forwarded to everybody's attention. We did receive these letters after the 12 p.m. deadline, but I did send them out to everybody's attention. One letter was received from Jeffrey Ferrano with Rutan and Tucker on behalf of Golden Springs. Another letter was received from Steve Masura, Director of Entitlements from Wexford Industries. Also, a letter was received from Mia Sobodian with Rutan and Tucker on behalf of Premier RV Storage, Santa Fe Springs, LLC. And the last letter received was from Kathy Fink of the Chamber of Commerce. Thank you, everyone.
Okay, thank you very much. So I will adjourn the meeting at 6:06 p.m.